have the honor to present the next award and lecture. It's the Kathleen Lyle Murray Award and Lectureship. Briefly, I'm going to tell you about the foundation and the story of this award. The Kathleen Lyle Murray Foundation was established in 1975 by Margaret and Clark Murray of Kansas City. Their daughter, Cathleen, born with CP, inspired their dedicated lifelong commitment to enhancing the life of individuals with multiple and severe physical limitations. Cathleen passed away at the age of 12 in 1962. Ms. Murray became national president of the United CP Association in the 1970s. She was also a member of the National Advisor Council on Developmental Disabilities in Washington, D.C., started the first daycare center for severely disabled children at their local church, and was instrumental in establishing what is now the Lee Ann Britton Infant Development Center in Kansas. She was a tireless organizer and administrator for the rights and education of people with disabilities until her passing in 2001. The Murray son, Brian, has upheld the position of administrator of the foundation since that time, carrying on his family's desire and dedication on behalf of the foundation since that time. This year's recipient is Judy Heumann, and I will share some of her achievements with you. I'm not going to disclose her age because she's a lady and in front of
72. Almost.
1,500 people. Okay, it's her choice. So, Judy is a lifelong advocate for the rights of disabled people, and I'm a huge fan. Judy graduated from Long Island University in Brooklyn, New York in 1969 and received her master's in public health from the University of California, Berkeley in 1975. She has received numerous awards, including being the first recipient of the Henry Betts Award in recognition of effort to significantly improve the quality of life for people with disabilities, and the Lifetime Achievement Award from the National Council on Independent Living. She has also been awarded several honorary doctorates from prestigious institutions. Recently, she received an honorary doctorate of education from Midbury College. She's now an internationally recognized leader in the disability rights community and a lifelong civil rights advocate. She has been featured in numerous documentaries on the history of the disability rights movement. Judy has also delivered a fascinating TED Talk that you can find on YouTube. President Obama appointed Judy as the first special advisor for international disability rights at the U.S. Department of State, where she served from 2010 to 2017. She was also appointed as the first director of the Department of Disability Services, where she was responsible for the Development, Disability, and Rehabilitation Services Administration. And there's more. From June 2002 and 2006, Judy served as the World Bank's first advisor on disability and development. In this position, she led the World Bank's disability work to expand the bank's knowledge and capability to work with governments and civil societies on including disability in the global conversation. Judy also served in the Clinton administration as the Assistant Secretary for the Office of Special Education and Rehab Services in the Department of Education. Now, as a senior fellow at the Foundation, she's currently working to help advance the inclusion of disability in the Foundation's work and is leading a project to advance the inclusion of disabled people in the media. Please welcome Judy Heumann.
First, I would really like to thank you, Veronica, because when I came in and came to the stage, I noticed that there is a lectern over there, which is not wheelchair accessible. And so I said that this is really a problem for me because psychologically, someone sitting down and someone standing up, in situations like this, there's a power dynamic. And so on her own, she came and sat next to me. So I really appreciate that. Let me say that it's really an honor for me to be getting this award, and that one of the purposes of the award is the impact on society through humanitarian efforts to enhance the lives of persons with disabilities. And I actually don't think about myself as a humanitarian. I think about myself as a rights advocate, and I feel very fortunate in the fact that I have, over the course of, I'm not quite 72, but over the course of my life, and I'll share some of these experiences, I've learned that it is critically important that all of us in this room come together for one objective, regardless of what your professional background is. My presumption is that you're doing the work you're doing because you believe that the quality of life for disabled individuals, regardless of age or disability, is not what it needs to be, and that you're playing a role in whatever profession you are working in to really help change that. And I think that's really something which is critical to keep in mind all the time. Why are you doing the work that you're doing? Is it to measure a muscle, or is it to produce a result? And from my perspective, the work that we should all be doing is to produce a result. And that result for me needs to be the inclusion of disabled people cross-age in our society, regardless of the country that we live in. Now, I'll give you a little bit of my background. So, I was born in Philadelphia, but I keep that a secret because I lived there only for 3 months, and I grew up in Brooklyn. So, any of you from New York, Brooklyn reigns. And I was the first of 3 children, and my parents were German Jew refugees from Germany. And my dad was in the military, and when he and my mom met, they got married, and they were off to have a family. So I was born in 1947, and I had polio in 1949. I was 18 months old. The only knowledge that my parents had about polio was President Roosevelt. So as a role model, that in and of itself was not bad. But I always say in the 1940s, no one was thinking about a woman becoming president, let alone a woman who had polio. We still haven't achieved it yet. So my parents were doing what other parents were doing at that time. I was 5 years old. What do you do when you have a 5-year-old kid?
Kindergarten.
Sorry?
Go to kindergarten.
You go to kindergarten. So my parents, being typical parents, took me to school, which was in walking distance, and they had no thought of asking the school district for anything. It wasn't accessible, but my mother would pull my wheelchair up the stairs, and I presumed she was going to come help me go to the bathroom. But we were greeted by a principal who said, no, I couldn't go to that school because I had a disability. I could be a fire hazard. Pick your sentence. Today at lunch, when I was talking to 2 people, one from Brazil, and I was asking what's going on in Brazil in relationship to inclusion of disabled children in school, and I'm not picking on Brazil. She said that there's a law. That law is not being appropriately implemented. Many children are not in school in inclusive schools, and many children are not getting the education that they need. And I had asked her the question, as a physical therapist, are you working in schools with kids? So there were I eventually got to go to school. I was in home instruction for the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and half of the 4th grade. I had a teacher who came to my house 2.5 hours a week. And obviously there was not a lot of expectation that I was going to grow up and get an education and be contributory to the community. My mother was finally able to get me into school. I was in the 4th grade. And when I went to a regular school, but the special ed classes were in the basement, it was really puzzling to me as a 9-year-old. So there were students in my class up to the age of like 20, 21, and there were many children with cerebral palsy. My friend who had muscular dystrophy and came into the class pretty soon after I did, we kind of joked that we integrated the classes that had children with cerebral palsy because I had polio and she had muscular dystrophy. But the bottom line of what was going on for children who had cerebral palsy is, by and large, at that point, there were very low expectations. And these students stayed in this program till they were 21, and then they went on to sheltered workshops. So when I think about Margaret Murray and the work that she was doing with United Cerebral Palsy, I feel really honored to be getting this award, because it was people like Margaret Murray, my mother, and thousands of other mothers that really began to push that children who had disabilities needed to be going to school. And stories go on, but a couple of stories that I think are very important. As I was growing up, my mother and father were doing advocacy work with other parents, and it was getting to a point where it was really clear that it was important for me and other disabled teenagers to look at the fact that we had to decide what we wanted to do with our lives. Whether or not the systems around us really were talking about transition school to work or employment didn't really matter. We saw what was going on with our brothers and our sisters and other people, and we were recognizing that the American dream was something that was not going to come to those of us who had disabilities unless there were some important changes that went on. This was in the 1960s and 70s. The civil rights movement was really exploding. We had the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Television and radio and newspapers were really allowing people to get a better understanding of the impact of discrimination and other populations of people in the United States and around the world, apartheid in South Africa, etc. And there'll be a film coming out next year that you should look for. It's being supported by Netflix. It's called Crip Camp. And it's basically the story of disabled people who went to this camp, and follows the lives of about 5 people and the transitions that we made in really coming into our own. And coming into our own really has meant that we need to see ourselves as individuals with disabilities. So I do not call myself a person with a disability. I call myself a disabled person. Many more disabled people are doing that because we feel pride in the fact that we have a disability. We're not trying to push it under the rug. We need to be thinking about people like Dr. Henry Betts and Dr. Rusk and Ginny Laurie, leaders in disability rights who did not have disability themselves, but who headed hospitals like the Rehab Institute of Chicago and Rusk Institute in New York, and Post-Polio Health Organization. These people saw the fact that medicine, surgery, PT, OT, speech therapy, on, in and of itself was meaningless. That it was really critically important that disabled individuals were meeting with other disabled individuals, one of the outcomes of the independent living movement in the United States and around the world, and that we need to be able to feel empowered, and we needed to be able to make change. So when you look at the transition of laws in the United States, and for those of you from other countries, today there are 175 countries that have ratified something called the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. Could you show me your hands? How many of you know what that is? Good. Next year, many more hands should go up. It's called the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, and it's really a critically important UN treaty because it basically, in principle, follows a lot of what the Americans with Disability Act does here in the United States. The passage of these major pieces of legislation really has been the result of disabled individuals from around the world coming together and basically saying, we want to be treated with dignity, with respect. We want you to understand what discrimination is. We no longer accept they didn't understand, they didn't mean what they did. We need to be banding together as disabled people, but also for every one of you in this room and for your colleagues around the world, it's critically important that we are coming together to understand what our ultimate objective is. Our ultimate objective, for me, is that we understand the different roles that we play in our communities, in our societies. that beyond our jobs, we're also looking at what is going on in my neighborhood, what is going on in the stores in my neighborhood, what is going on in my profession. We need to see more disabled people coming to these conferences. There must be deaf people who are in some of the professions that you're working in. Sign language interpreters, captioning. This group should be reflective of society. And in order to be reflective of society, it means that each one of us needs to do our job, to look at what barriers exist within the professions that we are working in. When I worked at the Department of Education under the Clinton administration, I had about 400 staff. And of course, we always had attrition and bringing new people in. My objective was to bring disabled individuals with different types of disabilities, different professional backgrounds, different religious and racial backgrounds, etc. And we had to look really hard. But we found really amazing people that came in to work with us. So for those of you who are in positions where you're recruiting students, where you're involved with the hiring of staff, please make sure that you are really putting a disability lens on the work that you're doing. When you think about Margaret Murray and the parents of the children that you're working with, or the families that you're working with who have adults with disabilities, recognize that it is our responsibility to allow people to see that the reason they're involved in the work that you're doing, if they choose, is to really help people become integrated members of society. The therapies that we talk about shouldn't be abstract. They should be relative to the everyday lives of the people that we're working with. People need to believe that you care about the whole and not just about a narrow part of the work that you're involved with. For me, I think of words like respect, equality, justice, and end of discrimination, valuing each one of us for our lives and your lives, looking at the roles of parents, looking at disabled individuals and parents, being much more integrated into the planning of the convenings that you're holding, because you need us like we need you. And parents shouldn't be on an advisory committee dealing with children. I think you need to look at your board of directors and really look at, are there people on the board who are living disability in their everyday lives? There's an appropriate role for parents, age appropriate. You need to also be engaging disabled youth and adults and seniors. We all hope to grow older. I had polio when I was 18 months old. Today I'm going to be 72. What is going on in the aging community as it pertains to rehabilitation and all the different professions that you represent? Disability continues to be absent. And really, the absence of disability as people are becoming older, as those of you in the room who are becoming older understand, is that our society is not keeping up with what we know and understand and have learned from the work that we've been doing with early childhood, primary, secondary education, higher education, and employment. So I want to leave you with a few hopes and aspirations for all of you. One is that you take seriously the fact that your jobs are very important, but your jobs need to reflect the vision of what we want our countries to look like. And that vision should be, regardless of the type of disability that a person has, that person and their families should envision the fact that they have a right to believe that their future is to help improve their countries, strengthen and stabilize their communities, and that regardless of the significance of a person's disability, there are contributions that people can make. And that has to do with the United States and any of the other 49 countries that are here. You need to look internally at what is going on within the organization so that this organization is reflective of disabled professionals, that you can be speaking about what is going on to bring more disabled people into the professions. I mean, in the late 1970s and early 1980s, it was very unusual to see a doctor who had a disability. But today, it's really exciting to see that there are more doctors with various disabilities who are working in the professions, and likewise for other fields. Do you know those people? How are they impacting the work that you're doing? So I really want to thank you all very much for this honor. I hope you take what I've said seriously. I've appreciated listening to the brain information. And I really look forward to looking at the continued work that you're doing to reflect the broader society and the overall goals and aspirations that we all have for the communities that we live in. Thank you very much.
She wants to take a picture one more
Sure.
time. So I bring up.
Awards.
Yeah, I think it's out of the way. Thank you. I'm going to give this to you. Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. That was amazing.
Can I just say one more thing?
Yes, of course.
I'm sorry, my friends would kill me. I have a book coming out in February. It's called, what the heck is it called? Being Human. My last name, Heumann. And you could look it up on Amazon and other places. And my friends are telling me I shouldn't be shy, I should talk about it. So